Hi, I'm Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief at The Contrarian. I'm delighted to welcome Stephen Kull. Stephen is the director of the program for public consultation at the University of Maryland. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You recently did some polling on attitudes about foreign aid, about USAID in particular, about tariffs, and I think they will surprise many people. Talk to us a little bit about what the public perception is in terms of this desire to cut or even eliminate foreign aid. Is that really such a popular position?
In standard polls, you find about half of the public calling for reductions in foreign aid or saying that we spend too much. This number has actually been coming down over the decades, but it's still around half. Now, in our survey, we asked respondents, how much of the budget do you think goes to foreign aid? And the majority thought it was at least 20% of the budget, on average, 25%. And then we asked them, what do you think an appropriate amount would be? And the majority said at least 10%, and which is 10 times the actual amount. In fact, and then when we said we looked more closely at what they thought it should be, an overwhelming majority said that it should be at least 1%, 84% overall, 89% overall, I'm sorry, and including 84% of Republicans said that it should be at least 1%.
And that's among Republicans. Democrats is even higher, but it's not as if Republicans are conflicted once they learn that the amount or the percentage is very small. That
Yeah.
seems to be something that we don't normally see in polls. What happens when you ask them about eliminating USAID? What is the reaction then?
The idea is, should it be abolished and folded into the State Department? And about 6 in 10 oppose that idea, but a majority of Republicans favor it. And I'm not sure it's a highly salient to people. This isn't a question of whether it should be basically eliminated and just some little bits left over. Just should it be folded into the State Department? And the way we do these surveys is we give them arguments pro and con, and the argument for not doing it is that it's been an independent agency, was meant to be that, and it shouldn't be at the service of our diplomatic goals, that it should be really more oriented to helping people. And the other argument is that no, it should be there to serve our diplomatic goals. And 6 in 10 said, keep it independent, but a majority of Republicans, about 6 in 10, favored the idea.
Seems to be a fairly good faith argument about where you put it. But when you ask just straightforward, are you in favor of abolishing foreign aid? What's the reaction that you get?
I think the best question would be how many people zeroed out foreign aid when given that option, and just a tiny percent, under 10%, want to zero it out. And when we went through specific programs and said exactly how much was going to each program, the numbers that zeroed it out were all very small, including among Republicans. Republicans, you get a majority who might want to cut it a little bit, but you don't have majority wanting to cut it a lot.
When we go beyond foreign aid to what we call collective security or NATO specifically, or even specifically aid to Ukraine, tell us what the public says about that. And I think reading your poll, it's not until we get to the question of Ukraine, which has been highly partisan of late, that you see a real divergence between Democrats and Republicans.
Well, you do have continued bipartisan support for aid to Ukraine. There is bipartisan support for the basic idea that collective security is really key, that countries should band together to defend countries that are being aggressed against, who are cross-border aggression, and that they should help those countries defend themselves, possibly even getting involved themselves, but in principle, primarily helping them in some way, and that gets very large bipartisan support. This is a principle that goes way back and is central to the UN Charter, and Americans have always resonated with it, with that idea.
When we then talk about Ukraine, there is majority support, but the gap between Republicans and Democrats is much more pronounced.
Yeah.
Has that been the case in prior polling if that you've done, or is that something that's relatively new?
It's been over the years, Republicans are not as supportive. Democrats are more emphatically supportive of principles of collective security and of giving foreign aid in general. But you do find majorities of Republicans in favor. It's just not as large a majority. And you have a larger small minority saying it should be eliminated.
Moving on to tariffs, as a free trader, I was somewhat warmed by the response, especially since the president seems to be a big fan of tariffs. What does the American public say in general, before we get to the specific case of China, about the international trade, about support or disapproval for tariffs?
The general idea of mutually lowering tariffs together with other countries in a kind of rules-based system where nobody can take advantage of other people and things like that, that's appealing to both parties. They do think that China has violated some of those rules and is acting in an unfair way, and so they do support raising tariffs on China. But the general principle that we should try to lower tariffs as much as we can does get bipartisan support in a general way. And the idea of a major increase in tariffs of 10 to 20%, that does not get majority support from either party. Now, again, Republicans are more supportive, but it's not a majority.
It's still 60% of Republicans who would oppose raising tariffs,
That's right.
which is rather remarkable given that the president's been such an advocate for trade tariffs. Let's move on to immigration, which has always been a highly charged issue. Where are you seeing some consensus that may not always be evident in the coverage that we see and in the partisan rhetoric?
There's, this idea of mass deportation. There are polls that show, a modest majority say, oh, okay, yeah, we should deport illegal people, yeah. But when it's spelled out more carefully, as we did, and also they see the option of offering people a path to citizenship, the people who are not criminals and so on, and then requiring they pay taxes and so on, you do get majority support overall for this path to citizenship, and even a plurality of Republicans, not a majority, but a plurality. So in every case, it's a minority that favors mass deportation. In principle, it sounds like, well, if somebody shouldn't be here, they should be deported. But when they're really thinking about 11 million people, and most of these people have been here for over a decade and so on, then they are interested in alternatives, and the alternative of offering them a path to citizenship in an orderly way is of interest.
Both parties are very supportive, almost equally so, in terms of border security. And that seems to indicate that pathway to citizenship plus border security is a pretty popular position, actually, with the general public.
Right. And also, there is support for requiring that employers verify that the person they're hiring is legal. But that's also coupled with a desire to have more visas available for workers. So they basically, all around, you see the support for legalizing the system. They really do not like the degree of chaos that's going on. And so they do want to remove the incentive for people to come here illegally, because the people are coming here primarily to get a job. And there are employers who want to hire them because there is a need for that, for those employees. So the combination of having more worker visas that are regulated according to the demand, so that these people are not competing with American workers, and then the visas also require that they pay equal amount of wages for the immigrants as for Americans. So they like the idea of sort of legalizing all of it. And right now employers don't do that. Employers don't really want to do that because they want to hire people because they need people. And so, but that the combination of more worker visas and employer verification is very attractive, and there is support for stronger border capacities, more officials at the border, and more surveillance capacity.
You see that there's a much larger consensus for, I think, what can fairly be described as a more moderate or more traditional American policy. And yet that's not reflected in our politics and in the political discussion. Is that because the people who feel the most strongly about this, the strongest, are the ones who take more extreme positions? Or is that because people aren't getting a type of argument as you provide them in the polls, which kind of explain it and take them through this?
There is a widespread perception that the way government makes decisions is not in line with the interests of the people, that they serve special interests. So there's a real resonance to the idea of taking dramatic steps that ostensibly look like they're going to help people, that they will in some way help the economy or will remove the competition from, illegal workers and things like that. And so there's a kind of initial positive orientation to innovations. At the same time, when you get into the specifics, there's often you find a relative comfort with the way things are in certain areas. Now, that's not true when it comes to immigration. They do want to see a lot of changes when it comes to immigration to legalize the system. But when it comes to trade or foreign aid, or the collective security, being part of NATO, things like that. Their majorities are pretty comfortable with the system that's in place.
Well, I think the results are somewhat comforting. It might suggest that perhaps the politicians have to do a better job, as good a job as the pollsters, in explaining what the real life alternatives are. But thank you very much,
There is
Dr. Kull.
tremendous demand on the part of the public for policymakers to listen to the people substantially more than they do. That's a widespread, overwhelming consensus among both
Well,
Republicans and Democrats.
Well, hopefully you and others will help us make good choices. Everyone wants change, but as we're learning very quickly, it's what kind of change and what the consequences of that change are that really make all the difference in the world. So thank you, Dr. Kull, and we will be watching all these figures because obviously foreign aid, NATO, Ukraine, immigration are going to be in the news for quite some time. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.